And at that time, during the war on drugs, crime had actually decreased. Even in Black communities were becoming wealthier.
Let me address that. I think that a lot of times we conflate the difference between disparities and racism, or disparities and discrimination. There are disparities that exist in this country.
That's an amazing point.
I know you studied sociology, so with topics such as, race, discrimination, other topics, like, is there anything that that could
help you?
Yes.
Yeah, great question. It really depends on what topic you're referring to. I could tell you where I go for my resources, right? One of the people that I listen to, and he's an incredible guy, Thomas Sowell. I read his books, I listen to his speeches, and he has a lot of reference points and research that's already done. I really don't think you have to recreate the wheel. You find intelligent people on both sides, and you listen to their arguments and their research points, and look that up, and you'll find a lot of clarification on these things.
I really like this point by Brandon Tatum. You do have to be a steward of research to an extent. However, you do not have to recreate the wheel. If you find two opposing ideals and two objectively intelligent people on either sides and just go into a deep dive on all the information that they support or they agree with, if you are, at least normal level of intelligence, you'll be able to decide which side makes more sense for you. And this is a really good way to learn about politics when it comes to conservatism and liberalism, or Democrat and Republican. As long as you know two smart people on either side, and just look at what they're saying, is what they're saying accurate in your life? Does research back their claims? You'll definitely be able to conclude what is true and what is false.
One of the books that I would refer with Thomas Sowell is Black Rednecks and White Liberals. That book, in the first 5 pages, you'll feel like you're the smartest person in the world. It tackles the issues of the modern day Black culture that we consider today. And it gives the story of why Black people are in the position that they're in, how historically the country has changed, and that some of the things that Black people are dealing with today is not uniquely a Black culture issue. It actually came from Europe, adopted by Blacks in the South, and it's been perpetuated. So issues of racial, I would say cultural identity is something that book explains. There's another book that he has, I forget the name of the book. I'll come back to you. But when you listen to Thomas Sowell, that's a good resource. And I'll say, just go down the rabbit hole with people that are scholars in that arena. A lot of what I speak on is people that I know personally that give information to me and my own experiences. So when it comes to racism in America, based on my experience, based on the things that I've researched, I think racism is a false narrative that's perpetuated to keep people victimized.
And one thing he said here that I really like is the word victimized. Victimized, victimized, victimized. I think, and if you don't believe this, then it may be something wrong with you. Racism as a concept obviously exists in the world, and it obviously exists in America. We all know that to be true, I would hope. But when it comes to systemic racism, the premise that systemic racism is discussed under is victimization of the Black community. That is where there's a problem. Because if you're blaming the trials and tribulations or the downfalls of the Black community on systemic racism, you are inherently removing any blame from the Black community on their issues. For example, the Black community children in inner cities have one of the lowest reading levels ever. We have one of the lowest reading levels in the country. Is that systemic racism's fault? And if you believe the premise of systemic racism, someone would argue that that is systemic racism's fault. That's the white man's fault. How is it the white man's fault that Black children in inner cities can't read? And that's the problem that I have. When you start defaulting blame to other races of people for obviously Black issues, it becomes a problem. Who would have thought?
Because I used to feel like America was racist, and it was in my mind. I get pulled over by a cop and I say, well, he pulled me over just because I'm Black. Now, I have no unequivocal evidence to prove that. It's just what I feel like. And after becoming a cop, it opened up my understanding to realize that maybe, just maybe, that's not the truth. So I will say that that's the way I approach my knowledge and information is I go to scholars and people that I trust with that, and I use my own experiences. Do you have something specific that you disagree with that you'd like me to clarify?
So I have been, studying race and ethnicity specifically as like a side thing. I just find it more interesting. And I found that there was a lot of information. Personally, I was like, racism doesn't exist. There aren't like any actual effects to that. But when I did my research, I found that there were disparities in a lot of different fields and how a lot of it is generational. So, for example, 1 in 10 children of incarcerated parents go into crime. So when the war on drugs happened, it caused the next generation of kids to be more likely to commit crimes from then. And at that time, during the war on drugs, crime had actually decreased, even in Black communities. Black communities were becoming wealthier, and this set them lower because, sorry, give me a second.
No, let me address that. I think that a lot of times we conflate the difference between disparities and racism or disparities and discrimination.
Yeah,
there are disparities that exist in this country, but
that's an amazing point. I'm going to let him finish, but that's an amazing point. Just because there's a disparity does not mean there's an inherent reference to a systemic oppression. And that's kind of what she was getting at when she brought up the crime statistic, or she brought up just racial disparities as a whole in America. A disparity does not automatically mean that there is oppression. For example, there is a racial disparity in the NBA. Majority of NBA players are Black. Does that mean that it's racism? No, obviously not. It's not racism. But there's a disparity. And what I'm saying is, just because there's a disparity, it doesn't mean there's evidence of bias or oppression.
There's reasons why. Like, for instance, more Black people get arrested per capita than white people do. And you look at it and you say, well, that may be racism, right? There has to be racism. Cops are attacking Black people and approaching Black people more often than they do whites. But then you look at the fact that Black people commit far more crime. Over half of all violent crimes are committed by Blacks, and the numbers vary, but right under half of all murders that exist in America are perpetuated by Black people. But that is the reason why Black people are being arrested more, not necessarily because police are racist against them. Let me give you another example. When you talk about police shootings, you probably can't name a single unarmed white person that's been shot. You can't name them. You don't see the video. So the narrative that Black people are somehow attacked and targeted by law enforcement officers is not necessarily true when you look at the facts.
He made a good point. If you like videos like this, comment down below. LFR Jojo.